This is a place which is almost like the crystallization of the dream of progress.
Every 5 years, something really radical that changes everybody's lives happens in Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley allows you to think as big as you want to think, to follow your path, follow your dreams.
If you want to grow business from zero to hero, this is the place to be.
But even here, turning dreams into reality is anything but easy.
What people read about, it's all the highlight reel of like your successes. But most of the intervening time is trying things that don't move the needle.
It's not that we're smarter. It's that our culture allows us to take more risks because we're not afraid that one shot and you're gone.
I think it's embedded into our architecture. It is no coincidence that our buildings are, for the most part, 2 stories high and surrounded by grass. So when things fail and people jump, they just sprain their ankle.
About 40 miles south of San Francisco lies Silicon Valley, home to Google, Apple, and Facebook. It's a crucible for technologies that have reshaped our daily lives.
Innovation and disruption is the adrenaline that makes everyone get up in the morning in Silicon Valley.
If you have a picture of the Earth from space in your house, on that photograph, San Mateo and Santa Clara counties together are 1 pixel. That pixel is the largest center of patent generation in the Western Hemisphere.
Over the last 100 years, Valley companies blazed new trails in radio, radar, and aviation, microchips and personal computers, software, smartphones, and social networking.
Silicon Valley is what Florence was to the Renaissance. It is the epicenter of a global cultural change, and technology is the enabler of this change.
But in the Valley, the future of any new technology is never clear.
Everyone always looks at startup ideas and thinks, oh, I could have had that idea if only I had thought of Facebook. Easy. And it's just not true. When you're creating a new technology, it's hard to just come up with something that users are going to like and that's easy for them to use, that they'll pay you for, that will spread. That's really hard.
Today, tech incubators like Y Combinator, known as YC, help startups find success by providing funding and advice.
You've got to have a call for action.
Its alumni include Reddit, Dropbox, and Airbnb. Airbnb is now worth $30 billion. But when its founders first came to YC, they were drowning in red ink.
They had already tried to fundraise on their idea of renting out an airbed for conferences, and no one would fund them. No investor was interested in funding, renting out your airbeds.
There were about $40,000, I think, in credit card debt between the two of them. They were out of ideas, basically, about how to make it grow. They were on the verge of giving up.
But then, a chance event changes everything.
One of Barry Manilow's drummers would often go on tour with Barry, and he had this great apartment in New York, and he asked the Airbnb founders, can I rent out my place? I'm not going to be there for a few months. And Airbnb said, oh, that's not the way we do it, but okay. And that was the aha moment.
I know how different you can make something by a few tweaks because I know Airbnb. For a whole year before they did YC, just didn't take off. This was Airbnb, the most successful company we've ever funded. And even they looked like, after a year, and yet they were only 1 or 2 tweaks away from being super successful. It's like a Rubik's Cube. A few steps before you solve it still looks like a mess.
In the Valley, life-changing innovations almost always start out as sketchy prototypes, their ultimate form hard to imagine.
So I'm putting in an entity called a statement.
One of the Valley's greatest innovators is so far ahead of his time that it takes decades for his vision to be realized. In the 1960s, a researcher named Douglas Engelbart develops a revolutionary new idea.
Douglas Engelbart dreamed of a world
in which individuals could be connected and could collaborate through computational technology.
This was stuff that was so futuristic. This is 1968. Computers are only used for important things like defending the United States against Russian bombers or running the balance sheet for General Motors. This is crazy that you would use a computer for something so trivial as word processing. That's why we have typewriters.
Engelbart lands a job at SRI, a research institute established by Stanford University to spur economic development in the Valley. Needing money to pursue his ideas, he turns to one of Silicon Valley's most reliable funders, the government, in this case, NASA, where Bob Taylor is exploring the potential of computers.
His proposal talked about augmenting the human intellect. I approve of that, yep. He fleshed out the nuts and bolts of a proposed system which would have a display and could show pictures as well as text. This new system clearly was designed to do more than arithmetic, all right? He had a keyboard. That means it was going to be interactive. That's good. He had a pointing device that he called a mouse, which you could select things with on the screen. Ah, that's much better than typing cursors on a keyboard to go duck, 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 duck. So these were all good things. They were nuts and bolts things, but they were good and they ought to be developed, explored, see what we can do with them. That's why I funded him.
And in December 1968, Doug Engelbart is ready to introduce his ideas to the world. San Francisco, some 1,000 people crowd into an auditorium to watch him unveil a technology that is commonplace today. But this is 1968.
When the thing started, he said, "I'd like to welcome you to this thing," and all of a sudden, bingo, his face appears about 30 feet wide.
Engelbart proceeds to show his audience something they've never seen before.
Copy a word. Say that word might copy after itself. In fact, that pair of words I'd like to copy after itself, and I can just do this a few times.
He was showing how a text editor worked, how you could take information from one document and put it in another document, very simple things.
A patchwork of phone cables and microwave transmitters moves data and video to and from Engelbart's crew at SRI.
And suddenly you see a video of somebody he's talking to down the peninsula at SRI.
I'd like now to have us bring in Jeff Rulison from Menlo Park.
And they're talking back and forth.
We're not hearing you very well.
Oh, you're not hearing me? How about now?
That's fine. Okay.
And the audience just went like, holy.
That was 1968?
So he's sitting there in Menlo Park looking at this text, and he can point to it.
And they're actually sharing the document and doing editing simultaneously on screen. Think about it. For ordinary consumers, that's only been possible in the last 10 years.
We can get sort of a good feeling for the way the whole system is put together by looking through the system guide.
This is almost like if a flying saucer landed on the stage.
This language has helped us.
He showed basically the architecture of modern computing. The whole ball of wax was right there.
Doug Engelbart's 1968 demonstration to his colleagues in San Francisco gets a standing ovation. But outside that auditorium, many in the computer industry are skeptical.
There were a lot of negative comments coming in, and there were people saying he was completely on the wrong track. Like, well, what is he doing that for? Why do you need that kind of interaction with a computer? The mouse looks like a terrible idea. Why would anybody use that?
It will take more than 15 years before Steve Jobs and Apple popularized the mouse with their Macintosh.
Doug had this large idea about these set of technologies that would accelerate human intellectual powers dramatically. And he felt that the computer industry sort of cherry-picked some of his ideas, but they missed the bigger concept.
What Doug was offering us was 10 speeds for the mind, and we were building tricycles.
But there is one place in Silicon Valley where people are excited about Engelbart's ideas and start putting them into practice.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You come into your office, grab a cup of coffee. Morning, Fred. And a Xerox machine presents your morning mail on a screen.
This 1979 TV commercial is shot at a Silicon Valley outpost of the East Coast copy machine giant Xerox. It's called the Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. a place Xerox establishes to foster the kind of innovation that's unlikely to happen back at corporate headquarters.
Companies are not good sources of innovation. That may come as a surprise, but in fact, that's true.
Xerox opens PARC in 1970 to explore what it calls the Office of the Future. The company hires Bob Taylor. He's managed computer research not only at NASA, where he funded Doug Engelbart, but also at the Pentagon, where he spearheaded the creation of ARPANET, the precursor to the Internet.
I knew more than any other person in the country at that time where the smartest computer scientists were because I'd spent 5 years getting to know them.
The smartest people anywhere, all came together, like 100 PhDs in one place, and they were just inventing new things like crazy.
Taylor sees a great opportunity for Xerox.
I said, well, you ought to move computing into the office. You've already got a presence in the office. You've got copiers all over the world. That means you've got salesmen who go into the offices who are well known. It's a natural. A lot of stuff that goes on in the office could be done by the right kind of computer. Not a number cruncher, but something more along the lines of the kind of thing that Engelbart did.
The PARC team builds on Engelbart's work.
They are figuring out how the graphical user interface is going to work. How are you going to interact with a computer? How about the mouse?
If you're working at something on a screen, you've got to be able to say this, and you don't want to have to go by steps up and down. You'd like to be able to point to it. That's what I want.
And in 1973, PARC creates a revolutionary new kind of computer called the Alto.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look. The shape of tomorrow may well be here today. Now, this logo design was made by Mark.
For the first time, we had a machine with a bitmap display and a pointing device and a microcoded processor. The sky was the limit of what you could do with that kind of a device.
We're still exploring new uses for Alto.
This same kind of technology that the rest of the world only saw in the mid-'80s was actually at Xerox PARC almost 10 years before, and it was just mind-boggling.
PARC also invents two other technologies that make the Alto even more powerful: laser printing and the networking system called Ethernet.
Those things were all of the characteristics needed to essentially create the future.
But back east, the senior people at Xerox are strongly attached to the past.
The first time I visited the Copier Research Center in Webster, New York, the head of that center came out in the lobby to meet me. The first thing he said to me was, the computer is never going to be as important to society as the copier.
The problem with Xerox is that they had such a nice, fat balance sheet from selling all those copiers that they weren't hungry. They didn't need people to be futzing around with all this new technology and Ethernet. I mean, that wasn't part of their bottom line. It didn't make sense.
Xerox decides the Alto will never be commercially viable and eventually gives up on computers.
There's all these great technologies that came out of Xerox PARC, surprisingly none of which really benefited Xerox itself, but many of them defined the computing environment that we're used to today.
Decades later, it may seem hard to understand how Xerox could have missed its chance to own the future. But in Silicon Valley, products that seem unpromising at first often wind up launching whole new industries. Today, they are played by close to 2 billion people and fuel a lucrative global market. But the gigantic video game industry isn't launched by a huge corporation. It's kickstarted by a scruffy young engineer in Silicon Valley.
The wonderful thing about disruption is it empowers the new guy, the disruptor.
And that was Atari. He hit it right on the nose.
Pong was basically TV tennis. It had a paddle, which was basically a white rectangle on the left side of the screen, same paddle on the right side.
And when you turn one of the knobs, one of the paddles tracks up and down with the knob. After you put a quarter in, a ball appears.
And when it would hit a paddle, it'd go, and when you'd miss it, it'd go. It was simple, it was fast, people loved it.
But for Bushnell, Pong's success is completely unexpected.
I actually thought it was a training project that was going to be a throwaway. I had no idea it was going to become a commercial product. I thought it was too simple.
Pong begins as a way for Bushnell to test the programming abilities of a new hire, Alan Alcorn.
He gave me Pong as this exercise, a throwaway thing, and it was the simplest game you could think of. And I tried to make it a good game by adding the ball speed up and the angles on it and stuff like that. And Nolan says, it's not bad, but it needs sound. You got to have sound. And I go, oh, man, Nolan, I'm already over budget. What kind of sound do you want? Oh, I want the sound of people cheering and applauding. I don't know how to do that. I poked around for a couple hours and found some tones that were already there. Didn't cost me hardly anything. I said, there's the sound. And if you don't like it, you go do it yourself, Nolan. So, okay, there's the sound. And we said, gee, it's a pretty good game. Let's put it out.
In September 1972, a prototype built by Alcorn and his colleague Ted Dabney is installed in a bar in Sunnyvale called Andy Caps.
Ted built a cabinet for it, slapped a laundromat coin mech on the side of it, and I put a TV set I'd bought at Walgreens in the thing and modified it to be a monitor. So we put it out there, and it ran for a while, and then it failed. So after work at 5 o'clock, I went over to Andy Caps to go fix it, and the first thing I do is I open up the coin mech because I want to give myself a free game to see what's going on. I open up the coin box, and the quarters just gushed out. It's just like, wow, that's interesting.
The game did so well that it totally filled up the cash box so that it could accept no more quarters. That's the easiest problem to fix.
Everybody went down to bowling alleys and bars and look at these machines, how fun to play.
Pong is an instant hit. Money starts pouring into the company.
The success of Atari was so foreign to me. You understand, I was at Cal Berkeley, I was a bit of an anarchist. So all of a sudden, I'm working at a company that's making like $1 million in sales in the first year. Like, that's an incredible number.
But even as the company grows bigger, Bushnell preserves its freewheeling culture, which he sees as essential to its success.
Nolan wanted to make it a fun place to work. And I remember when Tom Quinn from Sears, the buyer at Sears, shows up on our doorstep unannounced. He's wearing a suit and tie. None of us are wearing a suit and tie. There's a smell of rope burning in the back. And Tom is like mystified, like, what have I come into? Because this was not like a proper company. Yet we were making money.
My last tour of the factory at Atari was one I had to abort because I was sneezing and coughing. And Nolan said, apparently the marijuana in the air is not to your pleasure. People were smoking marijuana cigarettes in the manufacturing area.
But this freewheeling culture is not to last. In 1976, Bushnell needs cash for an ambitious new product. So he sells Atari to Warner Communications, a big East Coast conglomerate whose way of doing things could not be more different from his own.
They really didn't understand the Silicon Valley ethos. Under my management, I wouldn't allow reserved parking spots. First person got the best parking spot, the last person got the worst. You know, we're all in this thing together. Under Warner, not only were there reserved parking spots, but the CEO that replaced me was driven down by a limousine from San Francisco every day.
When Warner owned Atari, they had an executive dining room put in, literally so the execs wouldn't have to rub shoulders with the engineers. Like, are you nuts?
To Bushnell, Atari is losing its soul. It's no longer a place that thrives by breaking the rules and hiring all kinds of strange people, like a local college dropout named Steve.
This kid walks in, and I'm asking, you know, his little, what there was of a resume, and he said, you went to Reed College? Is that an engineering school? No, and you didn't graduate. What's my motivation here? And he says, well, I got this friend that works over Hewlett-Packard, and I'm thinking, what good does that do me? But he could solder, could read a schematic, and he was a hippie and cheap. I needed a tech. Boom, you're a tech, you're hired.
He actually came into my office and said, hi, I'm a new hire, and your soldering in this company is horrible. And I said, really? He says, yeah, none of your people know how to solder. And he had a couple of circuit boards with him, and he said, look at this circuit board. He says, that's a cold joint, that's a cold joint, that's a cold joint, that's a cold joint. He says, this board will fail within 3 months. I said, geez, what should we do? And he said, well, I'll fix it for you if you'd like. And he basically told everybody, you know, did a training class on what a good solder joint was.
And he's how old at that time?
19.
2 years later, Steve Jobs starts a company of his own, Apple Computer. Over the years to come, Atari, run by a series of corporate bosses, slowly fades away, as Apple, propelled by this driven young dropout, moves to center stage in Silicon Valley. Today, it's the world's most valuable company, worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Its longtime CEO, Steve Jobs, is revered as a visionary.
They call him the Babe Ruth of Silicon Valley, from the first Macintosh computer to the iPod.
He wanted to solve big problems. He once asked me, do you think it would ever be possible for me to be president of the United States? He was serious because he did not see any sort of problem that was insurmountable to him.
Steve Jobs was very driven to make something that was better than other people could make, that was further out beyond what other people were thinking of.
But Apple's journey to the top is a story of near misses, frustrations, and failures. The company is founded in 1976 by Jobs and his close friend, Steve Wozniak. It is Wozniak who designs and builds the computer that will later be known as the Apple I. But in the beginning, he wants nothing more than to hand his creation over to his bosses at Hewlett-Packard, the legendary Valley Electronics company.
I was going to work there for life as an engineer at the greatest engineering company that respected engineers the most. So I told Steve I had to offer it to Hewlett-Packard first, and I offered it. I implored them to build it, what it would cost. I wanted my division to build it. I'd be a hero in my division. And they turned me down for the first of 5 times. There was no obvious market. There was no obvious money in it. So Steve and I got to do it on the side. A lot of lucky accidents or Apple wouldn't have even had a start.
In 1977, Jobs and Wozniak bring out a more finished computer, whose appeal extends well beyond nerds and hobbyists.
One of the things that people don't realize is that computers weren't going to come into the home just because they were available. Who in their home wanted a computer like in a company that did inventory analysis and sales figures and employment? Who does that in their home? It had to have fun. Games were going to be the key element of it. So the Apple II actually shipped as very much a game machine.
By 1979, the company sells more than 40,000 Apple IIs. But Jobs isn't satisfied. He sets out to create a computer that's even more revolutionary. Some of Apple's engineers know about the Alto and are excited by what it can do. They want Jobs to go to Xerox PARC and see it. And in 1979, Jobs strikes a deal with Xerox that allows him to do just that.
Xerox corporate wanted to invest in Apple, wanted to buy some stock. And he said, I'll let you buy some stock if you'll let me come visit PARC. He saw the Alto, and it blew his mind.
He was very excited about the fonts. He was very excited about the graphical user interface, and very excited about cut, copy, and paste. He said, you're sitting on a gold mine, and you're not doing anything with it. And he just was incredulous.
Inspired by the Alto's graphic features, a few years later, Jobs takes them to places Doug Engelbart once dreamed about.
With the Macintosh, we gave them multiple overlapping windows with scrolling documents. We gave them fonts of any size and shape that they wanted, with styles of bold and outline and underline and so forth. What you see is what you get. You look at it on the window and the screen, and it looks exactly the way it's going to look when you print it out.
Jobs believes he can entice consumers to buy the Macintosh by making it extremely easy to use, freeing people from the complex text commands required by Apple's chief competitor, the East Coast giant, IBM.
To me, it just made sense that this looked more like the world I live in. This wasn't me adapting to technology. This was technology adapting to me.
The personal computer was about freedom. It was about telling authority that I don't have to follow your rules. I can have my own computer and do my own thing.
Today we celebrate the first glorious
Apple taps into this mystique with a legendary ad attacking IBM. It airs during the 1984 Super Bowl. Inspired by George Orwell's novel 1984, the ad promises to free consumers from the tyranny of IBM.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
But the Mac has a fatal flaw that the ad can't disguise.
The people it was addressing were the information technology people, the CIOs in companies. And it was basically saying to your customer, you are all mindless automatons following IBM. The problem with that was that the business marketplace that IBM was growing very, very rapidly, and the Mac did not have the capability to provide business applications. And in fact, Apple went into a 10-year decline after that.
By 1985, Apple's stock price is plummeting, and its very survival is in jeopardy. And Jobs' overbearing personality is alienating many who work with him.
Frank Sinatra once made a song very popular. The name of the song was called My Way. That was Steve. Do it my way.
In April 1985, Jobs loses the confidence of Apple's management and board and is demoted.
When Steve was told that he was going to be removed as GM of the Mac division, he said he cried for 3 days.
Soon after his demotion, a humiliated Jobs leaves Apple. He starts his own computer company called Next and takes over the pioneering animation studio Pixar.
Hey, Buzz! You're flying!
This isn't flying, this is falling with style.
And then, 12 years after leaving Apple, Jobs is asked by the still struggling company to once again be its boss. He leads an astonishing turnaround that takes Apple to new heights by introducing services like iTunes and the App Store, and wildly popular products like the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad, whose success stem in large part from his skill at exploiting something new to the Valley, the World Wide Web. Apps, news, shopping, streaming. It's hard to imagine living today without the World Wide Web. Invented in Europe in 1989, it marks one of its big turning points 4 years later, when two students at the University of Illinois, Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina, create Mosaic, the first popular web browser. But Mosaic's appeal is quickly dwarfed by that of its successor, an even easier-to-use browser that Andreessen develops in Silicon Valley. It's called Netscape Navigator.
Now all of a sudden, you had this ability to get everywhere really fast. You had access, you could browse.
But along the way to creating the software that would make the World Wide Web an information superhighway, Mark Andreessen nearly goes down a very different road. Tonight, he tells his story to entrepreneurs at Y Combinator.
Let's see, so how Netscape got started. So Jim Clark, who was the founder of a big, important company in the Valley at the time called Silicon Graphics, Jim Clark and I, we did the classic thing you're not supposed to do. We decided to start a company, and then we decided to come up with an idea, which is just generally a bad idea. So the most obvious thing in the world would have just been, let's just take what we did at Illinois, let's build a commercialized web browser, let's build commercialized web server software, let's build e-commerce software. The web was starting to take off, and you could just kind of see what was going to happen. The thing that was just overwhelming in the environment at the time, from the early 90s, and especially from early 94, you'll find that basically everybody in the establishment did not believe that the internet was going to be a serious thing. Like every single big company CEO, every single big tech CEO, every telecom CEO, every media CEO, they all thought the internet was a toy and a fad, and it was fine for nerds, but for sure, ordinary people were never ever going to use the internet.
An opinion that seemed to make sense, given the internet's history. The Pentagon had created the first version of the internet back in 1969, under the name ARPANET, by connecting 4 university computer centers. But this early network wasn't very user-friendly.
You had to type in 30 numbers and letters just for the address of some other location, and then all you did was type a memo to them. And it was like, why don't you just call them on the phone? It'd be a hell of a lot easier, or send them a postcard. So I remember walking out of there thinking, well, that's not as cool as I thought it would be. I don't see where that goes.
By the late 1970s, even as the first PCs are coming on the market, relatively few people own computers. Yet tens of millions of households have televisions, with more and more of them hooked up to cable. So many people think there is a bright future ahead for electronic networking, using television. In 1977, Warner Communications, the East Coast media conglomerate, launches a test of interactive TV.
Subscribers to the Warner Communications Company's Cube system here get a box like this at their television set at home. With these buttons, they can choose a program, but with these buttons, they can answer a multiple-choice question. Yes, no, not sure, whatever. That's what we're going to ask them to do now for us. People who watched this speech of the President's tonight, does the President's speech leave you, button 1, optimistic, button 2, pessimistic, or button 3, confused?
I think it's really a great idea. I've had a TV set in my house for years, and it's been talking at me, and I haven't had a chance to say anything, and now I've got a chance to talk back to it, tell it what I think.
Through the 1980s, many people in Silicon Valley think interactive TV is going to be a goldmine. Very few are paying attention to the internet. Even when at the end of the decade, the English scientist, Tim Berners-Lee, introduces the World Wide Web, which soon features pages of text and pictures linked together by a click. The World Wide Web makes the internet much easier to navigate. But two-way television continues to infatuate Silicon Valley.
Nobody ever gets it right. I can almost say 100% the computer visionaries are almost always wrong. Nobody got the web. It just came out of left field.
At the heart of it is you don't really know what the next big market's going to be. You think you've identified something, but you can't predict the future, and it's so volatile that it's very possible the one you're looking at that's hot right now will be cold tomorrow.
And that's what happens to interactive TV. It's a flop.
Lots of venture capital money was poured into this thing. And what it left was a financial crater big enough to be seen from the moon without field glasses.
But that disastrous bust paves the way for one of the biggest booms in the history of Silicon Valley.
And it left unemployed a whole bunch of engineers who had just become sensitized to the subtleties of rich media, video, audio, and the like. And they're literally standing on a street corner going, well, you know, gee, dude, what do we do next? And along comes the web, and they say, cool.
Andreessen and Clark decide that their new company, Netscape, should focus on the internet after all. So they finally commit themselves to Netscape Navigator.
And I remember both Jim and Mark painted a very exciting vision of what the future would be.
But even with the ease provided by Navigator, the early web has a substantial limitation.
When the web was first invented, it was completely static. You couldn't run the equivalent of programs on it.
That's because there's no way to ensure programs will be understood by the different kinds of computers people use. The solution comes from a Silicon Valley company named Sun Microsystems that's been trying to sell a new programming language called Java.
We ran at it a few different times, and really we're failing at getting it out to the world. And I remember feeling this crushing responsibility. And then it's sort of a typical story, combination of persistence, because a small core team of us just would not give up and kept working on this technology, and then just the pure luck, serendipity. Right at that moment, Mosaic came along.
The sudden popularity of web browsing makes the Sun team see a new potential for Java. It can bring motion to the web by making it easy to write small programs called applets that can run on any computer.
Our first demo was a bouncing ball demo, which today looks insanely trivial. But it was impossible to do that on the web before.
Because movement requires running a program.
That cube just looks like another dumb graphic. But it's not. It's a program running locally. This is why Java is so important. So there's a little application.
Now, all sorts of programs can run on the web using Java.
People were blown away by now this new vision of what the internet could be.
The breakthroughs that draw billions to the web only emerge in final form after traveling a long and jagged road. A road that's familiar to anyone in the valley with big dreams. And when you are trying to do something as revolutionary as making cars that drive themselves, the obstacles you face can be especially daunting.
I think most people dramatically underestimate, how steep that mountain is as you stand at the bottom and look up.
If the notion of watching someone sleep doesn't excite you, you may be in the minority.
It's been a lot of fun so far.
Millions of people.
In Silicon Valley, successful careers often follow the most unlikely paths. Kyle Vogt, who's from Kansas, drops out of MIT to get involved in web video.
I met some guys at Yale that were working on a reality TV show that eventually became a company called Justin TV. And I joined them and they said, well, if we want to do a startup, the only people, crazy enough to give us money are out in Silicon Valley in California. So we got on a plane, flew out there, and never came back.
Justin TV was one of the most awkward internet experiments of all time. We had come up with this sort of a lark idea, which was making a 24/7 live broadcast of my life to the internet.
On the Justin TV website, video of Khan's daily life streams live from a camera rigged to his head.
All right, thanks much. So we've got a head cam that basically broadcasts my point of view to the world. That goes into this backpack. That is true.
Vogt, who studied engineering before he dropped out, designs the technology.
Yeah, 1 second.
The show quickly draws thousands of followers.
Hang on. I think that's someone else's. Immediately, it became this whirlwind. It was on the Today Show and MTV and all this media.
Thousands are watching.
It led to all these weird experiences, from people randomly asking, oh, I want to go on a date with Justin, to people who would find that our show was boring. And so they would try to spice it up by calling the police on us.
His fans once told police there was a stabbing at Justin's.
Police, who's here?
Someone called 911 and said there was a stabbing in our apartment. They show up and they knock on the door and it's like, SF police, open up. I open the door and there's like a gun pointing right at my face.
To build up their audience, they enable subscribers to transmit their own video to the web.
The company pivoted from a reality TV show into a platform for live streaming.
But the founders find it hard to keep their audience growing. And the stakes are high, especially for Vogt.
I grew up in the Midwest, and my parents believe very soundly that to be successful in life, you need a college education. And so in the back of my head, I feel like I have something to prove.
Looking for ways to keep the business growing, the team notices that a lot of Justin TV users are watching each other play video games. So, in 2011, Vogt, Khan, and their partners spin off a new company focused on the gamers called Twitch.
All right, I'm pushing. I'm sneaking in here.
By 2014, tens of millions of people are watching billions of minutes of games each month. And the founders hit the jackpot.
The Seattle Times says Amazon is paying nearly $1 billion for the popular gaming site Twitch.
But in the meantime, Vogt has started yet another company called Cruise. It's building a rig that will enable any car to drive itself on highways. A radical change that Vogt sees as inevitable.
As Americans, we waste 50 billion hours a year commuting, and there's 10 million of us poor souls who commute, more than 2 hours a day. I just did that today coming down here. And people die in car accidents. There's a lot we can do by removing the human element from driving.
Cruise is selected to come to Y Combinator, the incubator that draws people chasing Silicon Valley dreams from all over the world. Vogt and the founders of the 73 other startups here will have just 12 weeks to develop their prototypes and then win over investors.
Wall Street analysts say that self-driving cars are going to be the next trillion-dollar industry. That's because every car is going to have it. It should have it. I believe in the future we may even live in a society where, people, human drivers, aren't allowed on the roads because it's not safe. I think there's going to be a company in this space there, and I hope it's us.
After working non-stop for 3 months, Vogt is ready to pitch his prototype to Valley investors.
So why Cruise? Well, history shows us that the companies who build breakthrough technologies but keep them locked up in a lab lose to the companies who ship early, collect data from their customers, and iterate their products. And that's exactly what we're doing. This car drove me from San Francisco to Mountain View this morning.
Investors are excited. They put several $1 million into Cruise. Vogt shifts his focus from just highway driving to enabling cars to be self-driving on any kind of road. In 2016, just 2 years after selling Twitch, Vogt once again strikes gold. His self-driving car makes such a strong impression on General Motors that it purchases Cruise for more than $1 billion, which gives him vast new resources.
And so working with GM, we can take the same thing we wanted to do, which was using self-driving car technology to improve people's lives and make transportation much safer, and we do that way faster.
Cruise hires hundreds of employees and now has a fleet of cars to work with, bringing VoteStream a few steps closer to reality.
You wake up in the morning when you want to go to work or go somewhere else, you pull out your phone, push a button, and a car rolls up without anyone in it. You hop in and you go where you're going. That's it. We've got a long way to go. There's a lot more people watching, a lot more responsibility, and that is both terrifying and invigorating. So for us, the journey's just begun.
If you look at the history of Silicon Valley, for every 1,000 startups, 990 eventually end up being inconsequential or failures. But the 10 that change the world have permanent, lasting global impact.
Silicon Valley is a special place, to say the least. The interesting thing about harder ideas or more ambitious ideas is that it's kind of a numbers game. You need one person to say yes, one investor, one acquirer, or someone to believe in your vision to make it happen. And there's such a high density of people who are willing to take risks and think big here in Silicon Valley. I couldn't imagine pulling off something like this anywhere else in the world.
We've now got, the computing capacity, and we've got the financial capacity to really go out and do the unthinkable. No place, I think, on earth do you have all of that in one place. Silicon Valley is unique.
Silicon Valley is an idea. It's an idea that you can swim against the tides of tradition, that you can be an innovator, that one person or a small band of people can come up with something that changes the world in a ridiculously short period of time and be rewarded for it. That's the essence of Silicon Valley.